Do you know there's two great days in a person's life? Mark Twain said. Mark Twain, the famous American author of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. He said there's two great days in a person's life. The day you were born and the day you find out why. What a great quote. Two great days in your life. The day you were born and the day you discover why. Last weekend and then today we're having his party. It was Benny's birthday. So we celebrate the day that he was born. We all know our birth date. It's quite easy to pinpoint. But the second date, the day you discovered why you were born, is a bit more tricky to pinpoint. Because it's probably not a literal date at all. It's the moment that you found out that moment, that light bulb moment that we've talked about before. When you suddenly figure out, this is why God put me on this planet. And if you've not had that moment yet, maybe over the coming weeks through this series, that's just what God is going to do. I've entitled the series, Joseph Discovering God's Purpose. And I want you to try and imagine a day before Andrew Lloyd Webber and Joseph's amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and Any Dream Will Do and all the songs that come to your mind, because that's not scripture, okay? That's Andrew Lloyd Webber, and he's got his twist on it. We're going to look at the real story, the boy behind the dreams of this. I love that picture. It's so, the one on the left, it's so glamorized and Chanel number 5, isn't it? What we're going to look at is Joseph, the real boy, the shepherd boy, the 17-year-old who hadn't got a clue what was going on in his life. Try and imagine that you don't know the story. And over the next few weeks, let the story unfold as if you were discovering it the first time with Joseph, because then we'll really understand what this young lad went through. So 2 days. The first day explains our presence on earth, our birth date. The second explains our purpose. You may have met somebody that you think, oh, this is just what you were born to do. Have you ever met somebody and you see him in a situation and you think, you were so good at that. You were just born for that. Maybe it's a carer and you just think, wow, they're so fab at that job. Maybe it's somebody in your family, somebody that you know, who's just so gifted in a particular role. You just think, yeah, you were born to do just that. Do you know what I'm talking about? We all know people like that, don't we? Who were just clearly born for that purpose. Do you know what the best-selling book in the world is? Shouldn't be a surprise. Yeah, the Bible has outsold any other book ever printed. Do you know the second best-selling book that has ever been printed? It's Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life. It's sold billions and billions of copies. Rick Warren's book called Purpose-Driven Life. If you've never read it, read it. It's a fabulous, fabulous book. Why has it sold so many copies? Because at the heart of every human is that question. A Murray poll done back in 2000 of people on the street, questions you could ask God. And I know I've told you this before. First question was, what am I here for? Second was, what happens when I die? That's what people on the street wanted to know if they could ask God any question. What am I here for? What is my purpose? And what happens when it's all over? I wonder how many prayers God must hear every day that beyond all the details, at their root is actually, Lord, what do you want me to do? If you take all the details out, so many of our prayers have at their root, God, what do you want me to do in this situation, in these circumstances? In Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, we know that those who trust in the Lord, he will make our paths straight. How exactly does he do it? 7 quick principles. He can put you exactly where he needs you to be. He can arrange the details. years in advance. He can open doors that seem tightly shut. He can remove obstacles that stand in the way. He can take your rubbish choices and fit them into his plan, so you end up in just the right place at just the right time. He can even take our mistakes and bring good out of them, and he can take tragedy and use it for his good, because he works for the good in all things for those who love him, and use those things for his glory. This is what Proverbs 16:9 means when it says, a man may plan his steps, but the Lord actually controls his way. So, discovering God's purpose. I wonder if you've done it yet. I wonder if you have discovered your unique purpose within God's grand scheme of things. Sometimes, some of us find that calling early in life. Some of us, it comes really late. Sometimes others see it before we do. Very often, others see in us something of God's calling, rather than us seeing it in ourselves. Often, it's the circumstances of life that bring about God revealing his purposes in us. So we're going to begin this series looking at Joseph and how Joseph discovered God's unique purpose for his life. This is the story of Joseph, son of Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham. One author calls him a man for all seasons. Why? Because he was chosen and rejected, loved and hated, favoured and abused, betrayed and rescued, promoted and imprisoned, tested and rewarded, slandered and praised. And yet, adversity didn't harden him. Prosperity didn't ruin him. Temptation didn't destroy him. Imprisonment didn't embitter him. Promotion didn't change him. Because he was truly a man of God. Most of us know about Moses and the Exodus to get the Hebrews out of Egypt. But the story of Joseph explains how the Hebrews got there, why they were in Egypt in the very first place. So it's really important. Genesis 37 introduces him this way. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. 3 simple facts we learn about Joseph. He's 17. He's working in the family business, tending the sheep. And he really doesn't have a clue what his future is going to look like. And life's like that, isn't it? Life's like that. If we were there, if we'd have asked Joseph, what will your future be, oh great dreamer? He would have had no idea. He would probably have assumed, like his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather, that he was going to be a shepherd. And that's a fair assumption to make. I remember in my early 20s being obsessed with trying to discover this elusive will of God for my life. I prayed and I prayed and I did everything that I could because I wanted to try and discover God's will for my life, and I tied myself in knots. Anybody understand what I'm talking about? We all do it, don't we? Trying to discover this elusive will of God for my life. But the older I get, the more I realise that you don't discover God's will for your life. God's will discovers you as you walk with him. You don't find it. It finds you. God does have a blueprint for your life, yes, but it's his blueprint, for his eyes only. Only he gets to see it, and he unrolls it before us bit by bit. A bit like the sun rising very slowly. And at the moment, we're right at the beginning of Joseph's blueprint. Just remember that when we meet Joseph, He's a 17-year-old boy tending the flocks without a clue of the roller coaster that's about to come and slap him round the face. So take courage when it happens to you too. First of all, our Joseph, what have we found out? Well, he comes from a dysfunctional family. Sounds familiar? His father Jacob had 4 wives, 11 brothers, 1 full brother, Benjamin, the youngest child of all, and there's bound to be trouble at home. He was his father's favourite son. His brothers all knew it. His mum Rachel was his father's favourite. You can imagine there's going to be some tensions going on at home. 1 father, 4 mothers, 12 brothers, and 1 daughter, Dina. 1 favourite son. Doesn't take a genius to figure out there's going to be a bit of tension at home. Trouble is brewing. And out of it comes Joseph, who many years down the line is actually going to rescue not only his family, but his nation. He's going to rescue these brothers that are about to betray him. But as the story opens, he's got no clue what's on the horizon. It's just another day. The great thing is that this lad Joseph, with his dysfunctional family, is so similar to us. And it just reminds us straight from the off that your circumstances and your background are no hindrance to God's call on your life and you serving God. Your starting point makes no difference at all. What you have done and what has been done to you makes no difference at all to you serving God. It is a level playing field for all others when God calls. Yes? I'm glad we agree, okay? We all start on a level playing field. We all come from dysfunctional families. We are all falling short of the glory of God. We were all separated from God, dead to our sin, spiritually blind, unable to help ourselves. We are all in the same boat. And if God hadn't intervened, we would all be in the same boat, sinking fast, had it not been for Jesus. It's just that some of us know it and believe it, and some of us don't. So if you can relate to this story, maybe this story's from you. If you come from a broken home and a messed up family, maybe this story's for you. If you struggle with your brothers and sisters and relationships and tensions, maybe there's something in this story for you. If you've done time in jail, then maybe Joseph has got something to speak to you. If your friends have lied to you and betrayed you, then in this story you're going to find something for you. And if your family doesn't understand you, then this story is definitely for you. So how does God's will unfold for Joseph? Well, back in the beginning, we find that he's tending the flocks. By the end of chapter 37, he's in prison in Egypt, and life seems to have taken a serious turn in the wrong direction. How does a 17-year-old Hebrew shepherd end up being the prime minister of Egypt? Because that's what happens. Here's a few steps that we're going to discover along the journey. First of all, he was a boy with different values. We read that his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. No doubt Jacob knew that some of his sons were men of poor character. He wouldn't have been telling his dad anything his dad didn't already know. And I wonder if you find yourself around people with different values, with different character to you. It can be a real challenge, can't it? Where we work, where we live, where we spend our time, being around people with a very different value set to us. It is hard to swim against the tide. It is hard to stand with different values to the people around you. But take courage. Joseph did it, and so can we. Secondly, maybe because of those different values, he found favour with his father. We read, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe with sleeves," the NRSV says. The NRV translates it an ornate robe, as we read earlier. This is the part of the story that most of us know. The phrase, "a robe of many colours," is not in Scripture at all. That's Andrew Lloyd Webber, I'm afraid. But it translates quite a difficult bit of Hebrew, they tell us. It was probably a coat that was richly embroidered, most likely with long sleeves. It was the kind of robe that a son of royalty would wear. And we may well debate among ourselves the wisdom of Jacob in this very public display that he got a favourite. Was that really such a good idea? I know the grief in our house when one of my kids thinks he's got one. One of them thinks they've got something that the other hasn't, and that's just with 2. So with 12 sons, was it such a good decision to set one of his sons apart? We don't know. Perhaps he shouldn't have made his feelings quite so obvious. But by wearing this robe, Joseph signalled to his brothers that he was destined for greatness in his father's eyes. Also, of course, a robe with long sleeves meant that he couldn't go and work practically out in the fields like his brothers. That's going to create even more tension in the family. What else do we know? Well, he was a dreamer. He had strange dreams. In his first, he and his brothers were gathering bundles of wheat in the field. His bundle stood up. The other bundles bowed down before it. Not too hard to figure that one out. Needless to say, his brothers were not well impressed by his dream and the fact that he chose to share it with them. The second was even more grand. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I've dreamed another dream. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." He told this one to his father and to his brothers. And at first his father rebuked him. But then later he pondered, what could this possibly mean? I wonder if you've ever dreamt of things being very different than the way they are. I wonder if God has put something on your heart that's not yet a reality, but it's something that's there. And somehow you just know that it's from God. You see a particular situation. Maybe you see a group of young people and something in you just stirs and you think, I know God wants more for them than this. Maybe you see dysfunctional families. May you live in one. Maybe you live in one. And something in you stirs and you think, I know that God wants more for families than this. Maybe you come to church and you see us, a bunch of people, and something in you stirs. And in your mind you see a picture of this place being packed out by people, being called by God. Has God put a dream, a picture, like Martin Luther King Jr.? Do you have a dream today? Maybe it's not a reality yet. Maybe it's something very different. But hold on to that dream, because it could well be something that God has placed in your heart, something that's not yet a reality. What else do we know? We know that his brothers hated him. He may have been gifted, but maybe he lacked a bit of wisdom and a bit of tact in the process. 4 times, verse 4, his brothers hated him. Verse 5, they hated him even more. Verse 8, they hated him even more. Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him. No wonder they couldn't speak any words kindly of him. Soon their anger and envy would lead to a shocking betrayal. Why is it that it seems to be the people that are closest to us that can cause us the most damage? Why is it the people that are closest to us are often the ones that don't recognize God's call on our lives? Not everyone is going to applaud your decision to follow Jesus. It happens to all of us. Some people are going to oppose you openly. Others are going to criticize you behind your back. And it's really painful, isn't it? when someone that you love just doesn't get your walk with God. And for those of you that have got spouses and family members that don't yet walk with God, that can be a hugely painful thing that keeps on bringing you to your knees in prayer. I know how painful that can be. So keep praying and keep holding on. In Joseph's case, his family members, the people closest to him, plot a hideous crime. They conspire to kill their own brother, all because of jealousy. Hebrews 12:15 warns us. It says, "Be sure that no root of bitterness springs up to cause trouble." And centuries later, Solomon would write these words. He writes, "A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot." It's sad, but it's true. Envy, bitterness not only cause rot, they destroy relationships and families. And that's just what happens. And there's something else just in these first few verses. God's call seems to cause life to get worse. I wonder if you've ever prayed the prayer, "God, take me. Use me for your purposes." I wonder if you've sung and meant it. "God, break me, melt me, mold me, and fill me." They are dangerous words. And then suddenly you wonder why everything starts going wrong. God is answering your prayer. He is providing circumstances that are going to break you and melt you down. Why? Because then he's going to reshape you. And he's going to remold you. He's going to refill you with his Spirit. And he's going to send your life in a completely different direction. So if you've prayed that prayer, and if it seems like things are going from bad to worse in your life, actually, take heart. God may well be answering your prayer and allowing circumstances that are going to do just the thing that you've prayed for, that are going to break you and melt you and mold you, that you might become less, that he might become more, as John the Baptist prayed. It's very interesting that nowhere in Genesis 37, this whole first chapter, is there any mention of God. You read it when you get home. There's no mention of God in Genesis 37. How interesting. Because it's true for us too. That even when God appears absent, God is still orchestrating his purposes for your life. God is still enthroned. God is still in control, even when there seems to be no mention. God is bringing about circumstances in Joseph's life because he is shaping him for his purposes. And even when it seems God is absent from the catastrophes of our lives, take heart. He's not. God is still there, just as he was with Joseph. That's why we need each other. That's why we share our stories and our lives with one another. Stories of God's faithfulness to encourage one another. So when I lose heart, somebody can say, "This is how God came through in my life." And then together we encourage one another. We spur one another on to love and good deeds because God is faithful. And when I can't see God in my story, I need to see God in your story to keep me going. Does that make sense? That's why we need one another. That's why we need to share our God stories. That's why we need to God gossip rather than just gossip. We need to God gossip. We need to share our stories of God's faithfulness to keep one another going when we can't see God in our story for a season. So hold on. Because the God who was faithful to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph will see you through too. Because he's our God too. And the amazing thing that not even the treachery of his brothers who decided to kill him, but then thought, actually, no, let's make some money out of him and sell him instead. Not even their treachery could thwart God's plans, because God is always in control. And later on, he actually looks back and amazingly says, you know, brothers, the thing that you meant for evil, God meant for good. Did God know about the betrayal that was about to come? Yes. Did he know about the slavery that he was going to go into? Yes. Did he know about Potiphar's wife and the temptation that we're going to find out in a couple of weeks' time? Yes. Did he know about all the false accusations that were going to be made? Yes. Did God know he was going to end up in prison? Yes. God knew all those things and lots more besides. At the beginning, I mentioned Rick Warren, who was probably one of the most famous pastors in America. He's one of the most famous Christian authors of today. And that book is fabulous. If you've not read Purpose Driven Life, do get a copy. It's brilliant. But 3 years ago, on April the 5th, 2013, was the worst day ever in Rick Warren's life. He and his wife went home from church knowing something wasn't right. They got a 27-year-old son, Matthew, who'd struggled all his life with mental health issues. And they'd done all that they could, spent a fortune on therapy and getting him the best help. So they went to his apartment that day, couldn't get in through the door, called the police, and fearing the worst, they knocked down the doors and found that their son had taken his own life. For 4 months, Rick Warren and his wife couldn't stand in front of Saddleback Church. Hundreds of thousands of people in his church. It's huge, huge. 4 months later, with massive press coverage, he came back to the podium. And he stood there and he said, when you go through a difficult time, you automatically start to try and find an answer. But explanations will never come, and they will never comfort. You don't need explanations. You need the presence of God. The media then reported that day as the service closed, Rick Warren stood there and he joined the worship team as we're going to finish our service later today, as they sang, "Blessed be your name." With his Bible in his hand, high above his head, he declared of the God that he serves, "You give and you take away. My heart will choose to say, blessed be your name." Because only a man with a big God can talk like that. A small God is never going to do when tragedy strikes. We need a big God, and we've got one. He was the God of Joseph, and he's our God. He's the God who takes us and uses us for his purposes. He's the God who takes our lives and shapes us and builds his character in us. So a hero rises out of the turmoil of a dysfunctional family. Joseph proves that you can come from a crazy mixed up family and you can do amazing things for God. And we're going to discover that over these next few weeks. But he's got a really bumpy ride to come. Amen. Let's just take a few